About a month ago, John and I were at Disneyland Paris. It's my favorite theme park. The level of detail put into that place is just off the charts compared to anything else. Whether you're talking about the scenery, the beautiful pathways and hidden areas, the upgraded versions of iconic attractions, or the music. But we're here to talk about the music. Because truthfully, a theme park wouldn't be the same without it. To talk about what I heard while at Disneyland Paris, we have to go back, specifically to 1827, because it was then in Germany that KfW Trandorf coined the term Gesamtkunstwerk. Literally translated to total artwork, the word refers to art that encompasses as many art forms as possible, or at least tries to. After being used by Richard Wagner in an essay about music of the future, the term became more and more commonly used to describe what we'd now label as late Romanticism. Put simply, a modern term used to describe art from the late 1800s that was ambitious and grand. So, Gesamtkunstwerk fit well within the late Romantic trend of European concert music of the time. Bigger was better, and though the term is sometimes associated with Wagner, himself a highly controversial composer who was infamously anti-Semitic, since the 1800s, Gesamtkunstwerk has become a popular word in many other contexts, and is largely shorthand for art that is ambitious, immersive, and all-encompassing. I'd say that theme parks do a similar thing. There are rides, but there are also buildings, actors, shows, signs, and music. To make a theme park, you have to be thinking of the whole picture. And even before Disneyland popularized the form of the theme park as an amusement park made up of themed areas, rides at amusement parks still utilized many different art forms. Which brings us to Pretzel dark rides. Founded in 1928 by Leon Cassidy and Marvin Rempfer, the Pretzel Amusement Ride Company was one of the pioneers of the dark ride format. In other words, the slow-moving rides that take guests through scenes. Back then, the pretzel rides were unique, but now dark rides can be found at almost any park. Similar to amusement park staples like haunted houses that had guests walking through scenes, pretzel dark rides created an interesting dynamic between the audience and the attraction. Unlike theater or concerts, dark rides invite audiences inside. Instead of sitting in front of a stage and watching a show, guests are given a tour through the show. And since these rides are mostly contained within buildings, the whole structure is dressed up to immerse the guests. As you might imagine, sound effects were also part of pretzel dark rides. Sound makers, such as cymbals placed in the right area, can add to the shocking experience. Since these rides were mainly in the dark, placing a sound maker or a tape machine near a monster or skeleton with an eerie or shocking sound could scare the audience and create the illusion that the sound was coming from the figure. None of these were incredibly complex, but they were incredibly innovative. And pretzel dark rides showed a unique side of amusement park design. Instead of just providing thrills like roller coasters did, pretzel dark rides made the story the center of the experience, and by using sound effects, they could bring the audience into the story. But this wasn't the only way that music found its way into parks. Live performers and ensembles have been integral parts of amusement parks since the beginning. And when Disneyland opened in 1955, it was no different. But Disneyland didn't just have the local firehouse band playing at the carnival. Instead, the music was generally themed to the specific area in which it happened. Louisiana jazz was played in the New Orleans Square section of the park, folk music was played in Frontierland, and turn-of-the-century music was featured on Main Street, USA. And of course, there were sound effects on the rides. Take the Jungle Cruise, for example. In a 1956 article from Popular Electronics, the ride's original sound system was explained. 74 separate loudspeaker systems, each carefully camouflaged beside animals and in the trees, reproduce the sounds. 6 miles of cable connect these speakers to power amplifiers. As you can see in the photos, how successful the camouflaging was is debatable. But just like the pretzel dark rides, when placed strategically, the speakers could give more life to the animatronic animals, making it seem like they were actually making noise. And the Jungle Cruise took it a step further. To make audiences think that a bird was flying overhead, the speakers would play a bird sound and slowly fade it from one speaker to another, creating the illusion that the sound was actually traveling. This was an approach similar to what was used in Fantasia, recalling the pan pod, a similar mechanism that was used in special viewings of the film to make it seem like sound was moving with animation. Like a lot of Disneyland, the Jungle Cruise represented a new standard of immersion. Unlike many amusement parks of the time, Disneyland was a carefully crafted and maintained park that was themed to multiple areas, popularizing the concept of a theme park. And just like the Jungle Cruise hid a lot of speakers around to increase the immersion, other attractions did the same. Music was even used for ambience. At some point in early Disneyland, When You Wish Upon a Star was played in Sleeping Beauty Castle. However, though music was beginning to be an important part of the art of theme parks, it was not as pervasive as it is today. There weren't speakers playing in every corner of every themed land.
You may or may not notice, but when you go to a Disneyland theme park, you're not going to see very many speakers anywhere. If you're seeing them, it's because it was an intention to set up part of the storyline.
When you're moving through an attraction, if you're on a moving vehicle, you need lots of speakers everywhere, because often the speakers are very close to you. Also often you don't want to have to be too loud, so you end up having lots of speakers everywhere, and nobody wants to see them.
And that's a whole entire art into itself that we work with our show set people and show set design team to not only hide them, but then have them painted over properly so they blend right in.
Though it's hard to say exactly when background music just started being played out of speakers at theme parks, we can pinpoint when it began at Disney parks. When Walt Disney World was being developed in the late 60s, Jack Wagner was brought on to not only continue being the voice of announcements, but also to make sure that the Magic Kingdom, Florida's equivalent of Disneyland, had continuous sound playing throughout the themed areas. Wagner would negotiate with record companies to secure the rights to single songs and albums, curating them based on loose themes that fit the separate sections. These would be controlled via playback machines and pumped out of speakers hidden throughout the park. The audio loops were assembled by hand by Jack Wagner and eventually became known as background music, also known as BGMs. In fact, some of the BGMs used on opening day at the Magic Kingdom can still be heard today. Each BGM was typically about an hour long, and that's a tradition that's mostly upheld today. There isn't much official information about why each BGM is around an hour long, but the website Passport to Dreams is a great resource for learning about Disney music and theme park design, and Foxy, the person running the website, even has a book out on the history of the Haunted Mansion. On her site, she also has some interesting speculation as to the length of BGMs. The 1 hour convention seems to have developed for two reasons. The first is that Wagner liked to use Scotch magnetic tapes to deliver his audio masters to Disneyland, no doubt because of the machine he had at his disposal back home. These tapes could house 30 minutes of music playing forwards and another 30 minutes playing backwards. The more songs he licensed, the more he could charge Disney for his services. So Jack had good incentive to fill the whole tape. The different types of speakers used in Disney parks varies depending on the park and era, but it seems that early Disneyland setups like the Jungle Cruise used exclusively Altec speakers, who even put out ads saying that they were the official speaker of Disneyland. Similarly, RCA released a press statement in 1969 saying that they contributed all of the speakers to Walt Disney World. And at modern-day Disney parks, you'll find a variety of different types of speakers, though JBL speakers are particularly popular. The idea of background music didn't just come out of nowhere. By the time that the Magic Kingdom opened with BGMs for the themed areas, Muzak had already popularized the idea of stimulus progression. Basically, by creating easy listening tracks with certain tempos combined with pseudoscience about the psychological effects of that, Muzak filled many US American shopping areas with their own music, under the premise that it would influence people to shop more. Given that ambient music playing through consumer areas was common and amusement parks already had themed music in sections, it makes sense that eventually the two ideas would be crossed to create the backbone of the modern theme park experience. All other sounds in Disneyland blend into their surroundings so well that it is impossible to identify them as being artificially produced. The myriad of voices, music, and background sound is so vital to the operation and success of Disneyland that a full-time sound crew has been hired to stand by constantly to service the equipment. BGMs are important. Since the original Jungle Cruise, the art of hiding speakers has become really precise, and you probably don't notice a majority of them when walking around Disney parks. There are some that aren't so well hidden, but even then, since music is playing from the moment you step on Disneyland Paris property, you're kind of tricked into not noticing them. And having an effective BGM is so much more than simply finding music that fits a theme. To truly immerse the audience, you also have to be careful about transitions. When creating Walt Disney World, Walt was insistent on making sure the themed areas did not overlap. So much so that he created an underground tunnel system, reportedly inspired by a time he saw an employee dressed up as a cowboy in Tomorrowland. The tunnels aren't at every Disney park, but the general principle is upheld. When you walk from one area to another, it doesn't just abruptly switch from one theme to another, and you also don't really see cast members from one area of the park in a conflicting area. The change is gradual, with many connecting paths between areas complementing each other. Similarly, the music also overlaps, either being in a similar tempo, key signature, or just general aesthetic. This isn't unique to Disney, but it's different than how many theme parks approach sound. Many parks just purchase a generic music license that gives them a large library of ready-to-go pop music that they play throughout the park. This can get guests hyped up and give them something to listen to while in line. But at the end of the day, it's a different vibe if you hear Katy Perry being blasted in the cowboy-themed section of the park, breaking any type of illusion. But if you're thinking about Disney park music, you're probably thinking of the rides. Disney attractions are known for being incredibly immersive and taking the whole hiding speakers thing to new levels. For example, if you ride something like Pirates of the Caribbean, you'd probably have a hard time finding where the speakers are. Though it might appear like there are speakers within the audio animatronics themselves, they actually don't have room for speakers inside. Instead, speakers are cleverly placed around them. In Pirates, this often means disguising the speakers as boxes or cargo. Since the pirates are already ransacking a town, it doesn't really break the illusion. And because there are so many pirates talking, singing, and yelling at the same time, it's often difficult to focus on one particular sound. This is much different than the Pretzel dark rides I mentioned earlier. Instead of just having a sound for each figure or scene as you pass by, the sheer volume of sounds is itself a way of immersing guests. Disney Imagineer legend Marty Sklar said that Xavier Exitensio, then a first-time scriptwriter, worried that he'd written too much dialogue and thought Walt Disney would reject it. But according to Sklar, Disney thought it was perfect. Think of it as a cocktail party, Disney reportedly told Atensio. You hear pieces over here and pieces over there, but you never get the whole thing. So what? You have to go back and write it again. So, sound design on a ride like Pirates requires much more than simply putting speakers down and playing audio. You have to record dialogue and sound effects, and though you can just have voice actors play certain characters, sometimes sound effects are more complicated.
I can't think of anything specifically where something didn't work, other than the Disneyland Hotel elevator sounds that sounded very cool, but just didn't feel right for Tower. Just didn't have the right. They sounded too like real world. They didn't sound, even after doing all my, my processing tricks to make it sound old and ghostly, it didn't. So, and that's the thing with sound design. A lot of times you find out a lot of the sounds you end up using have nothing to do with the real thing you're looking at.
This is Greg Meter, one of the people behind the sound design of many classic attractions. However, as you can hear, while working on Tower of Terror, a ride specifically about a haunted elevator, it became clear that the regular elevator sounds wouldn't cut it. Though the sounds he recorded were authentic, they didn't translate. They weren't recognizable as elevator sounds.
The real sound just doesn't have any, it just doesn't work. I mean, it's the real sound, but it doesn't sound right. Do you want it to sound like a gunshot, or do you want it to sound like a Hollywood gunshot? And, it's just, a real gunshot doesn't sound anything like what you hear in the movies, generally. So it's the same with all other sounds too. The real sound is way less dramatic than what you are expecting to hear.
This is essentially what the whole field of Foley is. In order to make movies sound more realistic than real life, artists have to get creative.
Weather is a really interesting thing to recreate. It depends on the elements that we're using and how it's filmed and what they want to hear.
The same could be said for theme park rides, as many of these techniques are used in that way. Though not every ride has as much dialogue and effects as the Pirates of the Caribbean rides do, they all usually follow the same principle. Lots and lots of speakers. Rides like It's a Small World have obvious speakers at the beginning of the ride that play over you as your boat enters the main building. But once inside, the speakers are usually blended into the main set. Many are difficult to notice unless you're trying to find them, but they're there. A telltale sign of a speaker is usually a perforated surface painted over to match the set. Sometimes these are hidden behind the animatronics, but other times they're out in the open. Other rides use this technique as well. Take this example of a cuckoo clock on Disneyland Paris's Pinocchio ride. The perforated surface hiding the speaker is behind the clock. The reason these types of surfaces are used is because they allow sound to easily travel through them. In some attractions, the speakers are also cleverly hidden so they're entirely out of view, but still project the sound. Disney World's Tiki Room is a good example of this. As in the pre-show, the speakers are hidden above the birds out of the general sightline of the audience. To see them, you have to literally be lying on the floor. But not all rides use speakers in that way. For example, Disneyland Paris's version of Space Mountain was the first roller coaster to have onboard audio. In other words, speakers are built directly onto the coaster trains so that the guests can hear the entire score throughout the ride. Instead of the cocktail party approach to sound design, this also allows a composer to write a full score that's specifically timed to the attraction. For many people, the scores are the most memorable parts of Disney theme parks. When I was growing up, I was obsessed with theme park music because just listening to a song could immediately bring me back to a ride. There weren't many other theme parks that did it the same way as Disney, with original music and effects that made individual attractions unique. So what makes Disney so special? Well, theme songs. Since the creation of Mickey Mouse, Disney's cartoons and music have taken influence from vaudeville and musical theater. This aesthetic continues to this day, with cartoon musicals and theme park rides showing the importance of songs at the forefront of Disney storytelling. The Sherman Brothers created the first examples of original theme songs specifically for Disney attractions, and they set a template for what makes an effective theme park jingle. Let's take There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow from the Carousel of Progress as an example.
There's a great big beautiful tomorrow, shining at the end of every day.
1. The song is in a major key signature, meaning that it will elicit happiness from those who grew up in cultures where major keys are associated with happiness. And 2. The song is mostly diatonic, meaning that if you were to put the song in C major, the melody would fit onto the white keys of the keyboard. Diatonic melodies are easier to sing, so this explains why it can easily get stuck in someone's head. The bridge of the song is actually one of the few examples of a Disney theme park melody where it strays briefly from diatonic, but that's why I say this is mostly the case. I'm not saying this because it's a general rule that's applied to every part of every song, but it's just something that many catchy theme park melodies share. If there's an earworm melody at a Disney park that you can't get out of your head, chances are it's diatonic. 3. The text is syllabic. This means that each syllable of the text has a note to go with it. This is different than holding a single syllable out over a few different notes, and it makes music easier to sing as well. If there's a catchy theme song that was specifically written for a Disney attraction, chances are it fits these categories. We see it in songs like Yo Ho Yo Ho, the Tiki 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 Room, and pretty much every Epcot Center jingle. These types of melodies lend themselves incredibly well to theme park rides because they're short, sweet, and catchy. They can also be used to tell stories. In the case of There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, each rendition of the song not only highlights the musical styles of the time period being depicted, but also seamlessly transitions into the next room's version. The arrangement then becomes a part of the immersion. Perhaps no theme park song does this better than It's Fun to Be Free from the now defunct World of Motion. Created for Epcot Center with a theme by Buddy Baker and Xavier Exitencio, the song helped depict the history of transportation by effortlessly changing between different arrangements that reflected certain time periods. However, it took this to a new level. Like the Carousel of Progress, the arrangements played on the ride and in the queue were able to help immerse the audience in different time periods, but they also weren't afraid to seriously stray from the original melody.
Fun to be free, be on the move, to go anywhere, with never a care to. It's fun to be free, to be on the move.
Using arrangements as storytelling elements isn't necessarily unique to Disney. For example, Alton Towers is well known for using Grieg's In the Hall of the Mountain King as their theme song and adapting the melody for each attraction, changing the arrangement to match the ride's overall theme. Though original tunes are still being written for Disney rides, over the years it's become increasingly uncommon. My guidelines about how certain songs work can help us understand old park themes and even some more recent ones, like In the Big Blue World from the Finding Nemo musical and Epcot ride. But they don't necessarily apply to things like Splash Mountain and Frozen Ever After, that feature songs not written specifically for the theme parks. And with more and more musical attractions being developed for the theme parks that use songs from pre-established properties and movies, it's clear that the old aesthetic of Disney park themes is not as relevant as it used to be. Sound is a part of life. When I wake up, the sounds of cars driving outside remind me that there is a world outside of my bedroom. When I hear someone talking on the phone in combination with the loud subway noises, I'm reminded that I live in a city. It's the combination of all of these things that reminds me that I'm living in a world that is truly alive. Some classify music as simply being organized sound. In that way, making music is a unique opportunity to curate sound in a way that's personal and intentional. But of course, recording music in a public park is a great way of intentionally embracing the spontaneous. One has the control of a song, but also the spontaneity of nature, wind, and all of the elements that make a recording feel alive. In making fully immersive environments, theme parks both attempt to replicate the real world and also do the exact opposite. When you go to somewhere like Disneyland Paris, you're not stepping into an authentic environment. Main Street takes inspiration from a real period, but ultimately it's a part true, part false creation that's made for entertainment purposes. Similarly, Pirates of the Caribbean is not meant to represent real pirates nor the Caribbean. It's a suggestion of those things that's, again, made for entertainment. But both of those areas also use elements of real life and sound. Hearing real horses walking on Main Street does give you an idea of the sounds you might have heard in an early 20th century American town. And though everything is deliberately planned, the hundreds of speakers on Pirates do immerse you in an intense and overwhelming scenario that might reflect some truth of what a pillaged town might sound like. I don't go to Disney parks to hear authenticity. I go to take a harrowing ride on a haunted elevator filled with spooky sounds. I go to take a boat ride through an approximation of the Caribbean, to be transported to a whole other world solely through the art of illusion. For me, the whole Gesamtkunstwerk nature of it means that everything is grand and ambitious. Disney's attention to detail is what makes it all come together in a way that I don't feel at other theme parks. But the experience isn't historical, it's emotional. But I don't mind that, because that's why I can spend 2 days going around Paris but still be excited about riding a Ratatouille ride in a cartoonish version of the same city. It doesn't replace real life, but it offers an entertaining alternative to it. All you have to do is keep your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the vehicle and listen.
There's a great big beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow, and tomorrow is just a dream away. Man has a dream, and that's the start. He follows his dream with mind and heart. And when it becomes a reality, it's a dream come true for you and me. So there's a great big beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow, and tomorrow is just a dream away. Man has a dream, and that's the start. He follows his dream with mind and heart. And when it becomes a reality, it's a dream come true for you and me. So there's a great big beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow, just a dream